This week, the Pentagon is threatening to blacklist Anthropic, the company behind Claude, using a designation normally reserved for foreign adversaries like Huawei.
A two-line prompt generated a photorealistic fight between Tom Cruise and Brad Pitt, and Hollywood is united against it. Meanwhile, 5 major AI models dropped in a single week from 4 different countries, and they're all getting cheaper.
OpenClaude's creator joins OpenAI, signaling the shift from chatbots to autonomous agents. And Figma just inverted the design-to-code workflow.
Plus, ChatGPT gets a lockdown mode. Waymo reveals how many humans it takes to run 3,000 robo-taxis.
It's time for What the AI. All the AI news you need to know in 30 minutes or less.
All right, so you might have noticed that this is not Annie with me today. She is off enjoying some beautiful part of the world for a well-deserved week of vacation. So I'm joined this week by Super Mishra, but go by Super. So Super, welcome to co-hosting What the AI. This is fun to have you here.
Yeah, great to be here, Jeff. Thanks for adding me on. Hope Annie's having a great time.
I gotta say, I told my family who was co-hosting this week, and they're like, that is like the coolest name ever. Like, how do I get that name? So yeah,
could be an AI. You never know.
Could be that's on my list of things to do for this podcast, but not yet. But Super, why don't you start us off with our first story of the week?
Yeah, well, this story has been building all week, and I actually think it's the most important thing happening in AI right now. Anthropic, the company that makes Claude, the AI model we use to produce this show, is in a standoff with the Pentagon.
With that case, I don't stand off with the Pentagon sounds dangerous, right? Like they got more guns than most of us. I don't want to stand up with them. What's going on? What's Claude doing? Like what's happening here?
Well, for some background, last July, Anthropic signed a contract worth up to $200 million with the Department of Defense, or I guess we should say Department of War now. Claude became the first AI model deployed on the Pentagon's classified networks. So they're running through Amazon's top secret cloud and Palantir's AI platform. Then this January, the US military seized Venezuelan President Maduro in an operation, and Claude was on the screens of officials monitoring that operation.
That's kind of crazy. Like I struggle to believe like Claude was sitting there on the screen in the Situation Room while they're watching this thing happen live. That's nuts.
Yeah, it is wild that we often say AI is moving fast, but this is not something that I anticipated coming out after that operation.
So what was it doing in the operation? Like walk me through what was Claude? It was not like directing troops in the field, I think.
Well, that's where accounts differ, and it's pretty interesting. Anthropic themselves say that Claude's role was limited to analytical and logistical support. So think like data mining, intelligence synthesis, stuff that we generally account for from neural nets or AI in the past. But a Semaphore report said Claude played no meaningful role in the actual seizure. Interestingly, the important part isn't what Claude did, it's what happened after. A Palantir exec reportedly told the Pentagon that Anthropic, quote, appeared to disapprove of its technology being used in the operation. Anthropic called that account false. They went back and forth. And Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth went public and said, quote, we will not employ AI models that won't allow you to fight wars.
I mean, to be fair, the Department of War probably wants their AI tools to be allowed to be used in the fighting of wars. This does seem like it runs a little bit counter to what Anthropic seems to have as its like ethical center that it wants to separate itself as. So, but he's taking a pretty direct shot at that stance of like, we don't want our AI used for like, deadly lethal force kind of things.
Yeah, and I think that's really where Claude and the Anthropic team must be having sort of their internal crisis or turmoil, where they started with their constitutional AI and where they ended up with being the forefront model used in the Department of War. Well, even after his comment, it kept escalating. It escalated fast. By mid-Feb, Hegseth was close to cutting ties entirely and even designating Anthropic a supply chain risk. This is something I didn't know about, but basically it's a classification that's normally reserved for foreign adversaries. And a senior Pentagon official told Axios, quote, we're dead serious. It will be an enormous pain in the ass to disentangle, and we are going to make sure they pay a price.
So I'm not familiar with this designation, supply chain risk. What does it mean, like to be a supply chain risk?
Yeah, I wasn't either. Hadn't heard of it. But as we dug into it, basically it means every single company doing business with the US military in any way would have to certify that they don't use Claude in their own workflows. So Think about it as, the $200 million contract, of course, means something to Anthropic, but at their scale, it's actually much more impactful if every contractor that the military works with has Claude blacklisted from the entire ecosystem. And Anthropic's largest investor, Amazon, has massive defense contracts of its own. So it's all tangled in there together.
That's messy. So what is Anthropic's kind of red line here? What is it that there was obviously some dispute this was false, whatever, but like, what is it that they don't want people doing with Claude?
Yeah, so they had two specific red lines that they put off for the military or the Pentagon. So
Okay.
the first one was no mass surveillance of Americans, and the second was no fully autonomous weapons, meaning weapons that fire with no human involvement. They said they're prepared to loosen other terms, but for them, they've said that those two are non negotiable. On the flip side, from the Pentagon's perspective, they've said they want, quote, all lawful purposes. And that's what they want in the agreement: unrestricted use across weapons development, intelligence collection, battlefield operations, so on and so forth. Here's the thing that makes this bigger than just one contract. As of this week, Elon Musk's XAI has agreed to all lawful use, that same term that the Pentagon wanted. They've
Yep.
signed up. And at least at the classification level, currently it's the most permissive stance of any AI lab that's out there. OpenAI and Google have agreed for unclassified systems, but they haven't yet signed on for classified work, although one can speculate that they're probably in progress. Executives at both companies privately, though, shared some of Anthropic's concerns. The question executives need to sit with really is, if the company that builds its entire brain around AI safety gets punished for maintaining those safety guardrails, while the company with the fewest restrictions gets rewarded, what does that do for every other AI lab's incentive to maintain their own safety commitments?
Well, if you want to have massive contracts with the DoD, I mean, that's the caveat on that question, right? Is like, if you want to have that stance, that's fine, but maybe you don't want to be the guy powering the DoD's AI chatbots if that's your perspective.
Yeah, I think that's totally right. It's, of course, every private company's choice what they decide to do and don't do. But you can sort of see both angles here, where it's an ethical or moral conflict with Anthropic. And from the Pentagon's perspective, they don't really want this one company dictating what they can and cannot do within the bounds of the law. It'll be interesting to see where this lands. And also, I'm especially curious to see what Google and OpenAI come out with and how they wrangle that internally and externally.
I was really surprised to find that Claude was the model that was at this point. I mean, it just feels like, if I were them going, that just doesn't, I don't need that headache. I don't need that. And I totally get the DoD's perspective. Like, if you're the DoD, you're bound by law, you're overseen by Congress, you buy a tool. I should be able to use a tool to do whatever Congress has authorized me to do. And the right oversight for that isn't, Anthropic or the CEO or its board or any other private company. You may not agree with where Congress sets those limits, but, having private companies have veto power over the usage of technologies by the government doesn't feel like where we want to be. So I was just surprised it wasn't like Google or Amazon or somebody with deep ties, Microsoft in the military already with lots of contracts that was out there being at the forefront of this. And Anthropic decided to put their hat in the ring for this. Just feels like, I won't say an own goal, but they set themselves up for a difficult position given their safety stance and choosing to be utilized in the classified networks of the DoD.
Yep. Yeah, I totally agree. I was also equally surprised. Seems like, one of the friendlier AIs and a surprising outcome for Claude.
My favorite AI right now. I mean, I love Claude. It's like a good friend.
Yeah, it definitely feels like they're adding the human nature to AI. I don't know how I feel about it, but they're definitely ahead.
They're there. All right, well, let's shift gears and talk about something else. This past week, we saw a whole bunch of different AI model releases that I think tell a pretty clear story. Model intelligence is commoditizing, and it's commoditizing fast.
Well, how many releases were we talking?
I think by my count, there were 5 different model releases this week, although I'm sure I missed a couple because, it gets a little crazy out there. So we'll start with ByteDance. They dropped Seed 2.0, a family of foundation models powering their Dubao app, which now has over 200 million users. It matches or beats GPT-5.2 and Claude Opus 4.5 on many benchmarks. So it's like right up there.
Wow.
Top of the line performance. But the headline isn't that performance, it's price. Seed 2.0 costs 47 cents per million tokens on input. Compare that to Opus 4.5 costing $5. That's like 10 times cheaper on competitive levels of intelligence.
10 times cheaper.
10 times. That's, we've seen this time and again, right? Like, American model sets the state of the art, then the Chinese model comes out like same performance, 10x cheaper. I think that's just going to keep happening. Another model comes out. Alibaba releases Quinn 3.5, which is an open weight model. You can run on your own hardware if you have, beefy enough hardware. 397 billion parameters, so it needs beefy hardware. But it only activates 17 billion per query through a mixture of experts architecture. It beats Alibaba's own trillion parameter predecessor at a fraction of the compute costs. And the hosted API costs 11 cents per million tokens, 1/18 the cost of Gemini 3 Pro. So both of these benchmarks are self-reported, I should note, but it'll take a while for the independent, but like pretty stunning numbers, to be honest, and amazingly cheap.
Yeah, that's pretty incredible. Sometimes with AI, it's easy to lose track of the billions and trillions of tokens, but these truly do seem like step change improvements, especially with the cost adjustment.
Yeah, I mean, that's been the story we've talked about for a while. Is the intelligence doesn't seem to be a maintainable edge in differentiation, and it's just commoditizing, right? Like you get the same intelligence or pretty much equivalent or indistinguishable. I mean, they're fighting about who's better at the math Olympiad. I don't know about you, but when I use models, I'm not asking math Olympiad questions and who gets gold
That's
versus
right.
silver. It's not that relevant to me. But the cost, certainly, if you're building anything on top of this, highly relevant.
Yeah, that's pretty crazy. Well, then there's also the video side of things, right?
Yeah, so not just the text models, baby. We got to talk about video. ByteDance dropped SeedDance 2.0, a video generation model, and an Irish filmmaker typed a 2-line prompt and generated a photorealistic fight scene between Tom Cruise and Brad Pitt on a rooftop. It got over 1.5 million views on X. Deadpool screenwriter Rhett Reese wrote, and I quote, "I hate to say it, it's likely over for us."
Wow.
Within 48 hours, the Motion Picture Association, representing Netflix, Paramount, Sony, Universal, Warner Brothers, and Disney, condemned it as, quote, unauthorized use of U.S. copyrighted work on a massive scale. Disney and Paramount sent cease and desist letters. Always got to love the cease and desist letters.
Yep.
But, here's the distribution angle coming to play. SeedDance plugs directly into TikTok, Douyin, and CapCut, which collectively reach over 1 billion users. So, if you want a place to actually get your video generation model used, those seem like the places you'd want to be.
It's hilarious with all the amount of content that's been generated that this video somehow became the one that broke through and really got the attention of Hollywood. But, when you pick Tom Cruise and Brad Pitt, I guess that's what happens.
You got to pick the right topics. I did watch this fight scene. And there was some cheesy stuff in the fight. I think the fight choreographer would go, that was not that good, but it looked good. It looked like them. It sounded like that. I mean, it was like, you got to wonder where this is going. And of course, as I always say, this is the worst it will ever be at generating rooftop fight between Tom Cruise and Brad Pitt, right? It's only getting better from here.
Yeah. And I'm sure that's what they're thinking about, is not what it can do today, but what this might look like 6 months, a year, a few years from now. So I understand why they're 6
months ago and compare it to today and go extrapolate that line out 6 months. And it's a scary place.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, then with Anthropic too, our favorite model here on the podcast for now, they released Sonnet 4.6.
That's right. 12 days after releasing Opus 4.6, their kind of top tier model, they're out with Sonnet 4.6, the mid-tier model that nearly matches Opus on every benchmark. On coding, it's 79.6 versus 80.8. Seems like indistinguishable to me, and my math's not that good. On computer use, 75.2 versus 72.7. And on office tasks, Sonnet actually beats Opus at 1/5 the cost. So $3 per million tokens versus $15 per million tokens on Opus. Axios ran the headline, Anthropic's basic model is almost as smart as its most advanced model. Honestly, Opus 4.6 has kind of blown my mind as I've been using it recently. And to think that you've now got a nearly order of magnitude cheaper version that's just as smart, kind of crazy.
That is quite incredible. And we're still not done. There is so much that happened. So Google then just recently, yesterday, dropped the Gemini 3.1 Pro model.
They did. I had already written the script for this show, and I had to ask Claude to add this one in at the last minute because, there you go, Gemini Pro.
Gotta cover it.
It felt like it wasn't that important. A 0.1, what's the big deal? But Google claims it more than doubled the reasoning performance. Their ARC AGI2 score, this is one of the really hard benchmarks, jumped from 31% to 77%. It's a 46-point leap, the largest ever for a single generation reasoning gain that any frontier family model has ever shown. Google says it's number 1 on 12 out of 18 tracked benchmarks, beating Opus 4.6, GPT-5 through GPT-5.3, Codex, and everybody else. And here's the kicker. They kept it the same price as 3.0, $2.12 per million tokens. So they doubled the reasoning capacity and just left the price. It's like Apple stuff.
That's pretty incredible. I don't know how much of that we can attribute to just Google scale or them having their own TPU infrastructure, but it is pretty clear that Google is flexing their advantages here.
Yeah, the only concern I have for Google is that their advantage seems to be building the best model. And right now, as we'll get to some of the stories later in the show, I don't think the best model is the thing that makes for the best experience as a user. And so they, if you had to say what's the best model, I like Opus 4.6, but Gemini Pro has got to be in your list of top 2 or 3 best models. But I haven't considered switching to Gemini for any number of reasons not related to the model. And that's where I think Google's going to have to up their game if they want to bring people back in.
Yeah, it's age old, right? In a way, these AI models are cutting edge and new, but the age old battle between the product, the actual underlying technology, and then distribution, where do you actually push to create an advantage? That's going to keep going. And it's so interesting to watch it unfold in real time.
Well, if this is true to Google's whole history, they've always been an engineering first, solve the technical problem, do the super hard CS computer engineering thing. And they've never been as good at product, other than the Google search box, which was like the simplest product ever, and they maintain that simplicity much to their credit. But really, they've been mostly about the technical feats of engineering, and they continue to deliver those, but they've never been as good at productizing, and they continue to disappoint on that front.
Yeah, well, we'll see where it goes. But I guess with that, it's not just the Chinese labs then driving prices down. Google's getting in the game.
Yeah, everybody's getting in the game to drive prices down, Anthropic, Google, and the Chinese model. But it just shows you, I think it's got to be scary if your differentiation is model intelligence, because it just doesn't feel like you'll be maintained and you're going to get your knees cut out from under you on cost. But if you're a developer, this seems like great news. If you're building on top of AI, like, let these guys take their billions and billions and hundreds of billions of dollars of VC money and fight over who can make the best model the cheapest. I love it.
Yeah, it accrues to the businesses and the individuals, that are trying these things out. So we'll see if there's a turning point at some point where they may not be able to subsidize these models quite as aggressively. What do you think is going to happen there? Do you think there's something that might change the tides, or we just keep going?
I don't, it's so hard to know what pops a bubble. I mean, people don't love to use the word bubble, but it's pretty clear that there's a valuation bubble. I'm not that some of these companies won't ultimately be worth what they're raising money at, but you've got some companies raising tens of billions of dollars with no product, no team, no nothing.
And a story we've seen before, right?
That clearly is a bubble. That doesn't mean that one of these companies won't be generational, the size of an Amazon or a Google or a Meta, but it does mean that we've seen some really high valuations. At some point, investors do start asking for return on investment. And I think that moment has to be coming at some point. I don't know what will trigger it, but it has to be coming.
Well, we'll enjoy the ride in the meantime. Well, on to the next one. This is a quick one, but I do love this story. So a company called Simile just raised $100 million, talking about funding rounds. And only in AI does this $100 million round feel small. But
That's right.
That's the era we're in right now. But the founding team is the Stanford group behind that famous 2023 generative agents paper, the one where researchers put 25 AI agents in a simulated town and just watched them autonomously organize a Valentine's Day party.
I remember reading this paper. This was so cool and so interesting and so clever. It was just an incredible story, that paper.
Yeah, it was such a good blend of creativity and engineering all in one. Yeah. It really got you thinking, well, 10,000 citations before the CEO finished his PhD. And so now they've commercialized it. Simile builds AI digital twins of real people. So get this, simulated agents that predict how customers, analysts, or voters will respond to products, decisions, and announcements. So pretty broad starting point. But they call it a flight simulator for human decisions. And like, for an example, CVS Health is using it to simulate customer behavior across their 9,000 stores. And the CEO already told Bloomberg that he correctly predicted 8 out of 10 analyst questions on a simulated earnings call using this technology. And they're partnering with Gallup for credibility. So, they're coming out strong.
I do love this idea of like simulating, like as opposed to doing just big focus groups or whatever. You can simulate the focus group as a the way we put things in staging before you put them in prod. You're like, oh, let's just see what the fake focus group thinks, the simulated focus group thinks. That is pretty interesting. How accurate do we think this is to like what real people would say, or since these are digital twins of real people, what those real people would say in similar situations?
Yeah, well, given that they're this early, I was pleasantly surprised. They say 85%, but that's specifically on replicating survey responses, not on predicting reactions to genuinely novel products. So a competitor called Aru, hopefully I'm pronouncing that right, is already valued at $1 billion, taking the exact opposite approach. So it's pure synthetic. There's no real human data. So the question is sort of whether grounded in real people is the right mode, or just statistical patterns overall are good enough. But the overall concept of simulating your audience before you ship, I think that's exactly the kind of application that cheap, abundant, smart intelligence models really can enable.
Yeah, I'm going to go with the both and on that question. Like, if I'm trying to simulate an earnings call or a sales call or whatever, like I want the real thing. I want a simulated human. If I'm trying to do broad market analysis or, political research on like, what is it like, you probably don't need to have the exact personalities of these 15 people. And it'll be really interesting to see how these companies can mirror kind of what's out there in the world so they can give you representative samples of that kind of thing.
Yeah, I think you're totally spot on there, where it probably is an augmenting approach. And probably as this gets cheaper, you'll be able to run this type of analysis for things that otherwise would have been uneconomical or unfeasible to run on. But now imagine you could do a focus group for every little feature you ship, where maybe it cost 10 grand to do that before. But if it's $20, you might as well run it every time you do something.
Run it every time you think of something.
Yeah, even better.
All right, quick reminder, if you're getting value from this podcast, the best thing you can do is share it with a colleague who's trying to navigate this crazy, fast-moving world of AI. Subscribe wherever you listen. And if you haven't left a review this week, please do it. We just covered the Pentagon threatening to blacklist an AI company and a $100 million funding round for simulating human behavior. If that doesn't make someone want to subscribe, I don't know if anything will. But for now, we'll keep up with this episode. We've got 2 stories this week that I think are part of the same bigger shift. So let's talk about them together. First, Peter Steinberger, the creator of OpenClaw, that open source AI agent that we talked about that went viral, is joining OpenAI. Sam Altman said, and I quote, "The future is going to be extremely multi-agent." Maybe he wanted to put a double underline under extremely for that one. Steinberger said his mission is to build an agent that even my mom can use. I love that. My mom and dad are always like, is it good enough for my mom and dad use? That's a good bar. So that's what he's trying to do.
That is great. And I like that you kept the essence of it. You used mum instead of mom. So yes, that is the direct quote there.
You got to quote him accurately. Mom.
You got to do it. Well, does OpenClaw stay open source though?
Yeah, it's transitioning to an independent foundation under an MIT license. This was really interesting. So OpenAI sponsors but doesn't control it. There's a little irony to the backstory here. The project was originally called ClaudeBot, the play obviously on Claude. Anthropic contacted him over trademark concerns. He renamed it, OpenClaw, and now he's joining OpenAI. That one kind of funny.
Back and forth.
Here's, I think, an interesting angle to this, though. CrowdStrike published a warning that misconfigured OpenClaw instances could be, quote, commandeered as a powerful backdoor AI agent. Researchers found over 40,000 exposed instances leaking API keys and website credentials. 22% of enterprise customers and employees had employees running OpenClaw without IT approval. So this thing is out there, but it's not the safest. And so there's a little bit of risk there for OpenAI bringing in this guy who created a thing that's maybe not the most secure version of multi-agent execution ever.
Yeah, for folks in security, I'm sure this is pure nightmare fuel. Just thinking about these agents running around their enterprise doing who knows what.
Yeah, and I mean, maybe it's a good incentive to make all the processes easier to do, so nobody's got OpenClaw doing it for them and giving them credentials to the whatever system that's a pain in the butt to use. Maybe it's time to fix that expense management system so I don't have to have OpenClaw file my reports for me. You can just make it easy.
Yeah. Well, I guess the question every exec is probably asking themselves right now, or should, what percentage of their employees are running AI agents that they have no idea about?
Yeah, the answer is more than you think. That's clearly the answer. So here's the second story. Figma and Anthropic launched Code to Canvas. It's a developer that builds a UI with Claude Code, types "send this to Figma," and the live browser state converts into a fully editable Figma layers. Not a screenshot, structured frames, preserving components, styles, and auto layout. And it works the other direction too. Figma designs can be directly pulled into Claude Code prompts.
So the design to code workflow, but inverted?
Design to code, code to design, whatever you want. For 15 years, the flow is design, then code. Now code, then design is a real workflow. You can kind of code it, get the basic UI, and then move the UI around in Figma. It's pretty awesome. Figma CEO Dylan Fields' frame is interesting. He said AI output is, quote, clay that needs to be shaped. So designers aren't being replaced. They're becoming curators of AI-generated possibilities. And Figma's Q4 revenue backs this up $304 million, 40% year-over-year growth. Despite everybody saying SaaS is dead, Figma seems to be doing just fine.
Yeah, this sort of like yes and integration between AI and SaaS makes me wonder if the whole SaaS is dead thesis is just, a bit overstated.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's been massively overstated. And everybody keeps forgetting to ask the question, like, shouldn't the SaaS companies just be able to lower their cost base through the floor with AI developers? And, I do think that there's still a really interesting intersection for AI and human judgment. Both of these stories, OpenClaw and OpenAI and Figma partnering with Anthropic, point to the same shift. The industry moving from that kind of AI that talks to you. I mean, I really have to say, if you're using AI in a chatbot interface and not in one of these agentic harnesses inside a workflow, it's a step function difference in what that feels like and what it's capable of. And it's very clear that that's where the world is heading, and it's heading there fast.
Yeah, all these things coming together all at once are interesting to observe. And I think really it's going to be the companies putting out these tools, and the users are going to come up with what works, what doesn't. It's almost like spaghetti on a wall, see what sticks.
It's almost like spaghetti on a wall and see what sticks.
Well, speaking of security and nightmare fuel earlier, maybe the only way to fight that is with more AI. So quick security story. OpenAI introduced lockdown mode for ChatGPT this past week. So it's an optional setting, but it's designed to prevent prompt injection attacks from exfilling your data. So when it's on, live web browsing is restricted, deep research and agent mode are disabled, image responses are blocked, no files can be downloaded, the whole shebang. It's available now for enterprise, education, and healthcare tiers, and we'll see where they roll it out from there.
This feels like the exact way you get to shadow IT in the first place, which is turning off all the features that make the thing useful and make people want to use it in the first place.
Yeah, it's an interesting extreme that they're starting from. Maybe they'll work their way back from it, but it goes nicely with all the scares that are going on with OpenClaw right now. I think that's the tension. Like the bigger deal here is that what OpenAI acknowledged alongside that, they said prompt injection, where an attacker hides malicious instructions in the content that AI reads, may never be fully solved. Never. So their blog post calls it one of the most significant risks we actively defend against. And OWASP ranks it as the #1 critical vulnerability in LLM apps. Only 35% of organizations have deployed any prompt injection defenses at all. So maybe something's better than nothing with what they're trying here.
Yeah, and you may think your users are too sophisticated to fall for this kind of stuff, but a quick reminder of why that may not be true. The acting director of CISA, the US government's own cybersecurity agency, uploaded classified adjacent documents to public ChatGPT just weeks before this feature launched, something I am sure they would have preferred that this individual not do.
Yeah, I mean, if the head of the US cybersecurity cannot use these tools securely, the red flag for every enterprise is pretty obvious. And I guess there's also a broader irony here. OpenAI is racing to ship more agentic capabilities while simultaneously building this kill switch for those same very capabilities. It's like selling the gas pedal and the emergency brake in the same release and leaving it up to you, the user, to figure out how to use both.
It may not be. It's tension and maybe irony, but it's also not a bad approach. I mean, some people want to be on the gas, some people want to be on the brake, and now you're letting people choose what lane they want to be in. I do think a challenge for enterprises will be, if you want to be on the brake, your employees may want to be on the gas, and they may actually ultimately control what ends up happening in your environment.
Yeah, that's true.
Well, let's wrap up with a quick one on Waymo. During Senate Commerce Committee testimony this past month, Waymo's chief safety officer disclosed something that became a much bigger story than they expected. Certainly surprised me. Waymo has 70 remote assistant agents on duty worldwide, overseeing 3,000 vehicles. That's one human for every 43 cars.
Wait. So are they driving remotely?
No. And that's a key distinction. The agents respond to multiple choice questions from a vehicle. Which lane should I use? Should I go around this obstacle? The autonomous system can accept or reject their systems. It still controls the steering, the acceleration, the braking. About half the agents are in the US and half are in the Philippines, which is where Senator Ed Markey had concerns. He called overseas operators a, quote, safety issue.
Yeah, I mean, I see where he's coming from. I just can't wrap my head around 70 people for 3,000 cars. Is that a lot? Is that a little?
That's the question, right? That everybody's going to be asking. Critics say it proves self-driving is a misnomer. I don't know if I agree with that. Defenders say 70 people for 3,000 cars, providing over 400,000 rides a week, is remarkably efficient. I think every robotaxi company has some sort of human oversight for critical instances or emergent issues, but that seems like they must be doing a pretty damn good job driving themselves. If there's only 70 people to cover 3,000 cars, that seems like a pretty low ratio to me. It means the self-driving is working pretty darn well.
Yeah. It's interesting to think about the different approaches between Waymo, Tesla, all the others out there. And I do wonder how much oversight that they have today and how much government regulation will dictate that versus just the companies deciding themselves.
Yeah, I mean, this will be a really interesting one. I know the Department of Transportation has done some really thoughtful analysis on how to govern and regulate this space. But I do hope that we, I think this is, and I've talked about this a lot, the need for government to focus on outcomes versus inputs. It's not like, I don't know that you want to have a regulation of how many drivers per autonomous vehicle. You need to have safety standards and safety expectations and the ability to intervene in certain kinds of instances. And that you would hope that number goes down over time. Honestly, if the AI is good enough, that's what you want. And so you want to be very careful that you're regulating the safety outcomes that you need, but not regulating the way you get there in a way that locks in current approaches or technologies, because that's how you see them being operated today. So it'll be really interesting to see if, not always optimistic that our United States Congress can find the right balance in these things, but maybe we can do that in some of the departments. But this feels like a great, I always wanted my kids not to learn to drive, or at least not to need to learn how to drive, because self-driving would be there. I missed that window. My oldest has his driver's permit, but this is so close, but this feels like a good example of how far this technology has come. It says that those cars are driving themselves the vast majority of the time.
Yeah, it is pretty incredible. Just a few years ago, we thought it was so far away. And, I took a Waymo 2 weeks ago. It's great.
I've been waiting. It's not in my part of LA yet. And every time I go to the Bay Area, where I need to go or where I am is not in the thing, but they just told me that it's coming to the Stanford campus, and I've got a meeting there in a couple of weeks. So I'm going to be taking the Waymo. I got my email from Waymo. I was very excited to take my Waymo from my hotel to the Stanford campus. It's coming for me. So I can't wait to give it a shot.
You'll have to update us on how that goes.
I will do that. And we'll leave it here for this week. That's all we've got for you, but we'll be back as always next week, or Andy will be back and Super will be back to his normal day job. Thank you, Super, for joining us, and we will see you guys next week.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. A lot of fun.